Amanda Martocchio, architect and woman leader of New Canaan. Welcome. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I was doing some research about your biography, and boy, we're going to have some fun today. Tell us a little bit about your early life. As a young person, you were traveling around a lot with your family. Tell us, why were you moving around so much?
Well, my father's a philosopher, a professor, and when I was quite young, he was finishing up his PhD at Yale. So I started in Connecticut. And his motivation for his first teaching position was to be in an area where we could have a big outdoor life. So he took a position as an assistant professor at Colorado State University, and all of our weekends were filled with camping and hiking and fishing, and in the winter, our Ford van was filled with lace-up boots and long skis and big parkas, and we took to the hills. And it was a wonderful family bonding experience.
How many are in your family?
Well, there's 5 of us.
Wow.
I have an older sister and a younger brother. And my younger brother is 10 years younger. So in the early years, it was my sister and me and my mom taking care of the 2 little girls. And then my brother came along. And I actually did a lot of parenting as the older middle sister to my youngest brother during those early years, because my parents were always very busy and doing their own pursuits. And they would often leave Davy at home, and I would take care of him.
What happened after Colorado? Where'd you go next?
My father was on a sabbatical leave and went to Munich, Germany. And we packed up the family, and now my 1-year-old younger brother, I was 11 at the time. And my parents, without any issue at all, put my sister and me into German schools, all-girl German schools. And it was a really transformative year in my life. Coming out of Colorado, kind of a small college town, and being thrust into this urban environment as the only American girl in school, and really trying to find my way in that environment. One of the things that was kind of a hallmark of those years was that I really started to find art as my voice. I was one of the things that the girls do in German schools is they have these albums, these personal journals, and they ask their girlfriends to write poems or do pictures in the journals. And I became quite popular because my drawings and poems were eye-catching.
They liked what they were seeing in their books, in their journals.
So it was a big year, not only for, kind of being able to be resilient in what could have been an uncomfortable environment, but also my parents took us all around Germany and countries outside of Germany, and I started to see art and architecture and opera and theater, and those things had a huge impact on my life.
So after a time in Germany, you came back to the United States with your family and were beginning a new life in Princeton, New Jersey?
My dad had an academic position in Princeton, New Jersey for the summer. So I'm a sophomore in high school, and I looked into how I could spend my summer, and there was a program at Parsons School of Design. It was an introduction to the visual arts, or professions in the visual arts, and this seemed like, wow, this is for me.
Got to check it out. Yeah.
Got to check it out. So I took the train into the city and the subway, and this must have been 1978 when things were a little dicey in the city, and found myself on 14th Street with a very eclectic group of extremely artistic teenagers. And we were shepherded around 2 different artist studios. And by artists, I mean graphic designers, film producers, industrial designers. And one of our tours was to an architect's studio. It was a husband and wife led firm. And it was a revelation.
That was
me.
the first time you met an architect, right?
I really didn't know what architecture was.
Sure.
And when I walked into the studio, and there were cardboard models and beautiful renderings and all of these drafting tools, which of course no longer exist, it just seemed like this could be a really good fit. And because I was very aware of how the shortfall of money could really impact life and create some stresses in life, I was always very focused on a career that I thought could make me financially independent. And one of the reasons why this was an aha moment when I visited the architect's studio is it all kind of came together. I had been a kid who had always taken a sketchbook around with me. That was my appendage. And it also garnered me some attention because I would sketch people's likenesses and they would, you're an emerging artist.
Yeah. Following high school, you went to Cornell University.
That's right.
Why did you go to Cornell? Tell us how that all came about.
The idea of a pre-professional degree was not consistent with my family background about studying the humanities, studying philosophy, art history. So taking that detour into a pre-professional program that was really targeted to a career diverged from my family background.
You're sort of a renegade, maybe.
So I spent a year as arts and sciences person, and then architecture for a bachelor's degree is 5 years. So I spent a lot of years in Ithaca.
And then on to Harvard. How did that transpire?
So I came to New York City after Cornell and worked for a couple years for larger firms doing cultural buildings and larger commercial buildings. And I recognized that that getting a graduate degree would really provide a new perspective and maybe challenge that very specific pedagogical path that Cornell sets. Mm-hmm. And also just higher education was something that really appealed to me. I love school. I love studying. So being in Cambridge for my master's program was really terrific. And at that point, I was in a relationship with someone who lived in New York City, my now husband. So there was a lot of back and forth a lot of train rides between Boston and New York.
When you were at Harvard, had you heard about the Harvard Five yet?
Oh, yeah. I mean, not really the Harvard Five, but how the Bauhaus came to the United States and, Gropius being at Harvard, all of that modernism was really spreading around the country in the 50s and late 40s. And of course it came through because it was really conceptually based, and I think in academic environments, that was part of the tradition of studying architecture, is understanding these principles of architecture that the Harvard Five were a part of.
You had a mentor and a professor at Harvard. Tell us a little bit about who that is.
Studying architecture, I did not have very many female professors. I had one at Cornell, but it really wasn't until Harvard and taking a studio with Toshiko Mori that who's a Japanese-American woman, and she was already emerging as a prominent academic and architect, practicing architect. As wonderful as she is and as rigorous an architect as she is, she never hid the fact that she has a family and she was juggling a lot of things, and it was just it was really great to see someone who was really at the top of her game professionally and doing really good work, being a very inspiring teacher, but also caring deeply about her family and juggling a lot. So that was important to see.
Following graduating from Harvard, having 2 incredible universities under your belt, when did you move to New Canaan?
We lived in the city and we enjoyed the theater and the restaurants and all of the great things that the city has to offer. And did a lot of traveling as well. And 5 years later, my daughter Julia was born. So during that 5-year period, I was working for some of the larger, renowned architecture firms in the city, and working really long hours, as one does as a junior architect. I was very involved in the design of the Mashantucket Pequot Museum up in Ledyard, and Stanford University Art Museum. So there were a lot of cultural buildings I was involved with. But the pace of that work was inconsistent with bearing a child who had profound needs. Julia was born with a brain injury, and we didn't know what that meant at the time. It was our first child, and we were new at parenting, but it became very clear that her brain injury would result in cognitive, physical delays, and the most challenging aspect of her illness or her condition was epilepsy. But I recognized that very early on that I could commit my entire life to caring for Julia. And Don and I have been extremely lucky that we've had the resources to have help with Julia. So with caregivers and the kinds of medical needs we have, I was able to start working when she was, I guess 9 months old is when I returned to work. And I was returning to work out of the maid's room in our little apartment, and started working. And my son, Luke, who's 22 now, Julia's 25, was born a couple years later. And I remember going to a construction site when I was so pregnant. I think I gave birth the next day. And it just seemed like I can do this. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's challenging, but I can do this. And being a mom to these 2 wonderful children, both of whom have challenges and needs, but Julia has extraordinary challenges, has been so worthwhile. But I think my greatest achievement is that I have been a mother to these kids. It's been so rewarding, but I've also been able to maintain my own personal identity as an architect.
That's great. So you're able to balance all of that.
I feel like I've been able to make a contribution with my career in architecture, and I've been a mm-hmm. mom. Not there every minute of the day, but the times that I'm with my kids mm-hmm. are engaging, and I'm very present.
How long have you lived in New Canaan?
So since 2001.
And what was it like when you first came out here and started looking around and deciding to come to New Canaan?
Right.
You had a lot of other choices probably.
So one of the biggest motivating factors was looking for a program in special education for Julia. So at the time, Julia was 7 years old. And we were really looking at a commutable distance to New York. My husband at the time was working on Wall Street, and would continue to take the train for several more years before quitting and becoming a school teacher at Greens Farms Academy.
Wow.
As a math teacher.
That's a switch.
But We were really looking for a high quality special education program and a community that valued special education and special needs children. And we found that in New Canaan.
Did you also, in the back of your mind, say, wow, there's a lot going on here architecturally too?
New Canaan was always in my mind. It was a map of the glass house. I had been studying it for 15 years, and it just seemed like a logical fit. While my educational life with architecture really exposed the modernist traditions, I was very aware of the Philip Johnson glass house and Elliott Noyes, and my own bias as an architect is modernism for our time. And it just seemed like living here in the shadow of the glass house made a lot of sense.
When did you start your own firm, and how many people work with you? Tell us a little bit
Sure.
about that.
Sure. So I started my own firm in New York City. And that was when my kids were quite young. I had an office in Union Square. And as a small-time practitioner, I did what a lot of small architects do, apartment renovations, lofts, creative agencies, that kind of thing. So moving to New Canaan was really like starting over, because you don't do a lot of lofts in Connecticut and townhouses. It was really designing homes and renovations of homes. It's really been a good fit for me because I really value home life and how our families live, and it also allows me to design in great detail. When you're designing houses, especially as a principal of a firm, you have to consider everything. You really are the architect of all of the pieces that come together. It's really about solving a problem, and I would have to say that I find the clarity of design one that doesn't have a lot of extras. So some people say that that is form following function, but I do believe that homes need to be warm environments, inviting environments, and often people talk about modernism as something cold. So I'm very interested in finding materials that create these spaces that are inviting, that are tactile, that give back some warmth to the occupants. And I'm always looking to expand natural light, because I think that natural light gives us well-being. So my agenda in design is to create environments that promote well-being.
You are very involved in many projects in New Canaan. You are on the board of TDAC, which is the Tourism and Economic Group, obviously promoting New Canaan. The New Canaan Library, you're on the Building Advisory Committee there, the Canaan Parish Redevelopment Program. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the projects you're working on?
Sure.
And what drew you to them? Obviously, your
Absolutely.
expertise is so valued.
I love New Canaan. I love the environment it's created for my family to thrive here. I think it's a beautiful, walkable town. There are so many interesting people doing fabulous things, the not-for-profits. I was on the board of the St. Luke's School here in New Canaan for 7 years, and at that time they were undergoing a very large physical facility expansion. And while I wasn't the architect, I could be in the role of helping steer that project. Again, I love this town, and I think the library has made a huge contribution to the cultural life of this town. And when I was asked to be on the building committee, I relished being asked and wanted to be involved, and again, not as the architect, but as someone who could usher in the project. It's going to make a huge contribution to the town, and expand, give the library an opportunity to expand their wonderful educational programming for all ages and all abilities. So it seemed like a logical fit for me. And then with TDAC, it just seemed like the right fit. I care immensely about the ability of this town to thrive, and certainly expanding economic opportunities and development in the town is a big part of that. But we have such a unique asset in this town with the architecture of the mid-century being really important in the whole history of architecture, and the incredible Grace Farms building that is open to the public, and all of these, including the library and the Summer Theater of New Canaan, all of these great organizations that contribute so much to the town. I wanted to be a part of seeing how we could promote that and put New Canaan on the map, because obviously we need new people coming into New Canaan to keep it a thriving community. And in order to do that, we need to celebrate and put out the word about how special New Canaan is, just the way my husband Don and I found New Canaan because of its fabulous education.
Well, you talk about all the things that you get involved with here in New Canaan. Do you think you would have been involved in part of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, getting the women the opportunity to vote 100 years ago, which is really why we're here today, to focus on that anniversary?
I think it's important to have different kinds of leaders. I'm not sure I would have been on the front lines, if that's your question, but I would have been there to support the agenda, absolutely, without question. We are better as a society when we're all involved and all our voices are part of the conversation and we all get our votes. So I would absolutely have supported that. I may not have been on the front lines.
All right. Do you think voting is a civic duty?
I absolutely think that we have an obligation to express our views of how the country should be heading, how our town should be heading. I just reminded my son the other day, you have got to send in your absentee ballot application. Every voice needs to be heard. And I know with the coronavirus, it's going to be especially challenging for everyone to feel comfortable voting in person. And we have to make sure that the elderly population have a voice, and those that are particularly vulnerable have a voice. So I absolutely believe it's our civic duty.
What gives you hope these days? What do you think's in our future?
It gives me hope when I hear conversations with people from different sides of the political spectrum who are engaging in civil and respectful conversations and hearing each other and looking for solutions to our big problems and finding ways of creating common good. It gives me hope when I see our New Canaan community come out, and the police officers and the young people and the old people walking down the street of South Avenue for Black lives, in support of Black lives, in support of social justice. That gives me hope. It gives me hope when I walk down the street with Julia in her wheelchair and people know her and say, "Hi, Julia," and she's part of the environment. So all of those things give me great hope that together, with all of our voices heard, we can solve some of these problems.
When you come across young women thinking about going into the architecture field, what kind of advice do you give them now? Something you may have learned when you were going through the steps.
So with the young women I've had in my office, I just tell them to stick to their guns and to I don't really see gender as a way that can be I don't see gender as an obstacle. Where it gets really tricky, why there are so few female principals in architecture firms, is not because of our education system. More than 50% of students of architecture are women, more than 50%. But it's very hard to get through childbearing years and to stay in the profession. So it's more at that intermediate stage. And it's okay to work part-time, and it's okay to take a break and come back. We need to support those women who opt to do that. So it's really just knowing that you're making a big contribution.
What is your favorite tradition in New Canaan?
Again, I love how the New Canaan Chamber of Commerce has created wonderful events in town. The holiday event is just fantastic. There's so much community shared, love of the town, and giving kids an opportunity to dance on the stage, and vendors bringing their wares out to the street and closing down Elm Street. It's a really good, feel-good environment. So I would have to say the holiday event.
One last question. In terms of New Canaan, you've talked a lot about different things that you love about it. Is there one special thing about New Canaan that you tell people that are coming in from the outside right out of the gate? What's so great about New Canaan?
Yeah. I think it's the fact that people care so deeply about this town in all walks of life. You see it all around. People stepping up, volunteering, wanting to make the town the best it can be.
Amanda Martocchio, thank you so much for being here. You are really a true leader here in New Canaan. Thanks for being here today talking with us.
Thank you so much.